But they have journalists and they run a line that supports people like Kevin Rudd and Malcolm Turnbull, these embittered former politicians that actually try and shut down commercial operations. They actually want to see any right of centre or mainstream media organisation associated with News Corp shut down. So you have a publicly funded organisation campaigning against organisations that pay their way. I find that an extraordinary misuse of taxpayers' money.
Well, the ABC Charter obliges it to represent the cultural diversity of Australia. It doesn't mean that the ABC should be set up and run itself in opposition to, say, News Corp, because News Corp actually represents a large number of Australians who voluntarily subscribe to that platform, who expect to be represented by the ABC too. And that's not what we're getting. And for that board member to suggest that this podcast and yourself are wanting to cancel the ABC, and that's cancel culture, that's like saying the government is cancelling Netflix for not giving them $1.1 billion a year. At the end of the day, it's a public policy program. And this is, I think the government and the Liberal Party need to come to the realisation that something needs to be done about this. And thankfully, many of the members of the government that I've spoken to for this podcast are of that view and are putting out their reform options. Pretty much no one I spoke to on this podcast thinks the ABC should be defunded and abolished, but this is putting the spectrum of policy ideas out there, all the way from privatisation to a subscription service, to enable us to see the best ABC possible. An ABC that might not be funded by taxpayers, that might just allow them to air advertising so it's less reliant on taxpayers.
But your organisation says it should be defunded.
Be explored.
Your organisation, the IPA, says it should be defunded, privatised, effectively just flicked from government. So that kind of undermines that argument, doesn't it?
Well, I certainly believe in privatisation of the ABC, and so does the Institute of Public Affairs. But that doesn't actually mean the end of the ABC, as many people on the left will try to say. You know, they just want to abolish the ABC. Privatisation just means freeing it from taxpayer funds. And as many economists point out, for example, in this podcast, the ABC will actually do quite well in a private media market. The ABC, left to its own being, could gather subscriptions from its audience. You could pass it on to its staff to run the organisation as a subscriber mutual, for example, where it could do quite well. It's got an audience. Yes, their audience share is only about 15% of the market across most platforms. But that is a significant in itself that would gather a lot of revenue and make it less reliant on taxpayers. Because currently we get a choice whether we want to subscribe to News Corp or subscribe to Fairfax. We don't get a choice with the ABC. And my organisation, the RPA, is all about choice. So at the end of the day, this is giving viewers, this is giving media consumers choice in the matter.
Well, let's have a look, listen to some more of what you've covered in the podcast. And here's some of the former Labor leader, now One Nation New South Wales politician you mentioned, Mark Latham.
Oh, I don't fit the narrative. As a state MP, I raise a lot of issues about the education system, the energy system, flaws in government policy. But I think it's now 18 months since I've been asked to do a TV or radio interview on the ABC out of Oldemo, and Sydney is my home city, and I would have thought that the volume of stories that I publicise, I'd rate some kind of presence on their talk political radio programs in particular, but it's a complete blank.
There you go, Mark Latham saying he doesn't get asked on there very often anymore, which is extraordinary given how significant he is in public debate. They haven't asked me on the ABC for a long while either. This is the problem, isn't it? This is the essence of it. There is not a plurality of views, and that's the word that's actually used under the law in the ABC Charter.
Yeah, and we actually look into how their recent updates to editorial guidelines basically gives them permission to not air views of elected members of parliament that might be deemed controversial, or they might be deemed to be spewing out hate speech. And, Mark Latham got a significant portion of the vote at the last state election. They're happy to have Greens upper house MPs from New South Wales on the ABC Sydney, for example, but not Mark Latham. And it's really a corruption when we're all asked to pay for the ABC, it's only fair that all views that people elect into, say, parliaments are provided by the ABC. And, for another example is that, they won't have anyone from the IPA on, but it's many Conservatives that have the same view. And often, as many of the guests in my program have spoken about, they'll have a Conservative guest on as a token, just one person on a large panel. Q&A, for example, they'll sit a Conservative or a classical Liberal next to a left-wing comedian or next to someone like Van Batten, as you've experienced, and they'll be tolerated, but they'll be tolerated to mock and scorn at. And that's just not what our ABC is there to do. It needs to represent all Australians. It
is so obvious, and, they fill their panels up, shows like Insiders and Q&A and whatever, with people I would call anti-conservatives. They absolutely stack the ledger. It's so obvious, though. There are senior producers and managing directors and the like who have the authority to do something here, and they do nothing. So, who's actually in charge of the joint?
Exactly, and we've seen countless examples at the ABC that we delve into in this podcast that shows that no one actually is in charge. There's no discipline of staff members that go out of line. Even if they do go out of line, they have their legal costs represented for them. So example after example, we've seen that the ABC is a staff-run collective, and something really needs to change. So this podcast is all about pushing that barrow and actually coming up with the public policy ideas to find solutions so we can finally not have it as their ABC, just the ABC. Thanks for joining us, Evan. I appreciate it. Thanks, Chris. Evan Mulholland there from the Institute of Public Affairs. You saw it there, Their ABC. It's Their ABC is the podcast. And yes, an interest. I did an interview for that podcast. No money, no commercial arrangement. I just was one of the people they interviewed. So look out for that. The first episode was released yesterday.